Welcome to FOBtv, the future of business. I'm your host, Kevin Benedict, and I want to thank each of you for joining the program today. Our guest for this episode is my friend, Ved Sen. Ved, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Kevin. It's always fun to be here.
Now, Ved is the head of innovation for the UK and Ireland for TCS. And as you guys know, TCS is one of the biggest companies out there globally, 600,000 plus employees and involved in so many exciting things. So, Ved, thanks again for being here. Where are you calling in from today?
I'm at the London Spaceport, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit. It's on the 44th floor of a building where I have amazing views of London. So yes.
Ah, that's awesome. And what's the purpose of the London Spaceport in a nutshell?
In a nutshell, it's to help our clients go on a journey of figuring out how they best want to build their innovation engines for their own organizations, but also to solve problems that don't have easy answers, and sometimes to explore the future. We're obviously in a very volatile world with a number of axes of change, and so most clients and most organizations we work with are having to, I guess, create an innovation engine which is enterprise grade and can actually drive change for organizations. And that's what we are looking to do in the Spaceport.
Oh, yeah. And let's try to talk more about that before we finish today. So, Ved, you and I have worked together for well over a decade in different technologies and different geographies and all kinds of different things. Now, I'm going to ask you this. You know, we focused over our relationship, we focused on mobile and omni-channel and Internet of Things and all kinds of stuff. How is this AI generation, this AI era, different from all of those that you and I have experienced together?
It's a really good question, Kev. And I'm glad you used the word mobile because, you know, if you remember when mobile smartphones especially sort of came through, you had this phenomenon, and we used to speak about this, about what they call the Sunday night, Monday morning effect, which is the tech you use at home on Sunday night is better than the tech you get in the office on Monday morning for a lot of people, because everyone had a smartphone and you didn't have one in office. And I think we're seeing that with generative AI, because as companies still figure out whether or not and how to allow generative AI inside the business, everyone's using it at home. They're to play with it. So people have got a sense of the magic of generative AI. And I think that's just the tip of the iceberg. But to your specific question, I think this is foundational. It's a sheer size and scale of the impact of the change that AI will drive. I would guess it's like the change driven by the internet itself or computing itself. It's that kind of seismic change. And probably the reason is that while some of the other technologies we talked about ultimately have specific areas of applicability, I think AI goes across the board. It applies to everything. It's foundational. And that's one of the primary reasons why I think this is bigger than pretty much everything else you and I have spoken about.
Wow. So yesterday I was talking to an expert from Oracle in AI, and he's been working on AI forever. And it's almost like he was a bit offended that the world is just discovering AI now. He's like, I've been building AI into healthcare, into retail, and all these things forever.
Yeah, you do get that, right?
Yeah. So how do you think generative AI is going to impact all these industrial AI projects that have been around for decades?
So what I find really fascinating about generative AI is actually that while there have been a lot of different kinds of AI, predictive AI that can categorize, all of these have been around for a long time. But AI has largely been the domain of a few experts, like your friend who's been working at it behind the scenes. And most people don't get it and how it works, but it does something which is kind of a bit of a black box and magical. And it takes a lot of work behind the scenes for you to get it right. I think what generative AI has done is it's taken all of that and made it a consumer product. AI was not a consumer product before generative AI. And I think Gen AI is a consumer grade technology that everybody, the student, the cook, everybody, the chef, the gardener, everybody can use it and figure out how to do something better, how to find answers. it has a language and linguistic capability, which I think it's a superpower. It gets context. It can run conversations. So I think what this will do, it's obviously that generative AI has created the halo effect for all of AI. It's kind of the window into AI. Now people get it because everyone can play with this and see the magic of it. And I think over time, what my hypothesis is that generative AI then ultimately becomes the front end of all AI. And the way you talk to systems and you talk to machines, maybe the way you talk to your car, the way you talk to your own data, will be through an interface of generative AI. And you won't have to know a language, a code, a fill of form, or even any complex interface like that to interact with a machine. So Gen AI then becomes the top layer of all other AI, maybe even of all other technology.
And to your point on that, Ved, I find myself using the search function on Google far less.
Yeah.
I go to Bing or some other front end, and now with Gemini, probably going to be using more of the Google. But I want to have, when I think I have to go to the search engine, I'm like, that's such a waste of time because I'm going to get a bunch of ads, a bunch of scroll through, a bunch of links, many of which can be horrible or off topic. I just want to ask a question and I want answers.
And I think I think there are two kinds of reasons why you go to a search engine. One is you want something very specific. You're having an argument with a friend about who won the Wimbledon in 1979, and you do a Google search, and that's fine. But I think that's 20%. 80%, you are doing something bigger, of which the search is a function. You are trying to assimilate information because you need to write a presentation, a paper, answer a question, build a perspective of something. And that's where the search is just a little task in a much bigger task that you have to still do yourself.
Yes.
And I think what generative AI does, it does the task for you. You don't have to ask it. You have to ask it one question and it'll assemble all of it for you. So obviously it's an order of magnitude higher in its capability to do that job for you. It's not just doing one task. So completely get that. I did have a prediction last year that Google would rethink its interface thanks to generative AI. It didn't happen. So, zero on one for that one. But I do think that maybe with Gemini, you'll get kind of Gemini going into Google search in the way that Bing has already transformed itself. So maybe this year we'll see Google build Gemini into its own search models.
It's just fascinating. Absolutely. So let's talk about your personal application of generative AI. How do you, are you one of those that use it hourly, daily, weekly, monthly, and for what purposes?
So I could be better. First, let me say that I could be a lot better at using it. I think we're all kind of figuring out this whole thing about how to prompt and everything. So I'll say that it's always open on one window, one of the many tabs on my browser. Like it's permanently open with whether it's Bing or now Gemini or it's ChatGPT.
Yeah.
And the place where I find myself using it a lot more is research and questions there are certain questions it's hard to do on a Google search or any search engine because you would have to repeat yourself. You do 10 or 15 or 20 searches. So if I wanted to know, for example, how often does the word innovation appear in the annual reports of Fortune 100 companies?
Yes.
I could spend the whole day going kind of layer by layer, doing hundreds of Google searches, or I could just ask this question as I've just phrased it, and I would get an answer. So I find that kind of meta research, where I'm not looking for a specific piece of data, but I'm looking for a point of view, is what I most often go to it for. I use it more than once a day on average, but I know that there are people who also use it almost as a bouncing board for ideas. Some people use it as an executive assistant, maybe. Some people even use it as almost therapy, and I'm less convinced about that bit. But I know that there are people who will do a lot of their life planning, holiday planning, etc., with GPT. I think in all of this, we have to be conscious that what you're getting back as an answer, is linguistically great, but it may not always be factually accurate. So I think you have to be the best judge of what kind of things you ask it and where you need to validate and use your judgment a little bit, because otherwise, I dare say it could get into trouble.
Oh, absolutely. I use it almost hourly because, a lot of my job is research. So I have it open and I will do a research document in, let's say, utilizing the assistance of ChatGPT. But then I take that document straight over to Gemini and I ask Gemini to fact check it. and to find anything that I have missed, or that maybe it not missed, but I failed to explain it in an effective way. So I'm using the two to judge each other and to correct each other constantly. And I can absolutely see that as being especially as a lot more of these very specific GPTs get developed, being able to have all these things both check it out and add to it from their area of expertise. So yeah, it's just really interesting.
And I think to that, the really interesting point you just made is that I think there is a skill involved in learning how to use these better. And that in the way you just explained it, and I've spoken to a lot of people who tell me this, the first answer you get back may not be the version you want to use, right? Either you query it, you challenge it, you push it for more detail, or you take it to a different engine and you ask the same question, you ask it to fact check it as you did. So I think there are methodologies involved here. I guess prompt engineering such covers a lot of that. But I think there's a learning curve for us as well on how we use these, how to get the best out of generative AI tool like that, and what not to do as well.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
I love your example, by the way. I mean, you should just automate that so you don't have to actually physically do that yourself. It just naturally
I
does the
know it.
back.
But I use a prompt because I always do this. First, the first go at it from Chat GPT or something doesn't mean that it's the best answer. You're right. So then I use kind of a combination words. Please read, review, reflect upon, and ponder. Is this the best answer, or is there a better way of doing this, or find? And I was taught by one of our experts on our team, Howard Shargle, all these little things about just it invites and encourages ChatGPT to take a moment to pause, to actually think a little deeper before it gives you that second answer. So lots of fun there. Let me move on here, though. In January, I read an article that you had written, and it was called 2024 Looking Ahead, where you asked the question in it, what will happen in 2024? And you had some ideas. One of those, you said humanoids, the creation of startling human-like robots. Tell us your thoughts there.
So this is just me thinking out loud that all the components that you might need to get robots that look increasingly like humans are in place. I think we've seen robots 5 years ago that physically could look like humans a lot more in terms of skin and even the malleability of the surfaces and things they use. You've got the haptic capabilities now that have come in, the finger pads and the ability to grasp. So if you think of all these different components, and now with the evolution of AI and language, it feels like it's a matter of time before someone can assemble these into a single robot that will be, or at least look and feel like, I'm not saying at all that it'll be human-like in the sense that you wanted to distinguish it from a human, but they will look more like humans than ever before. And I say startlingly because the physical appearance of it, I think, especially with generative AI's ability to create faces that are unique and original faces, all of that will go into creating robots that look like humans a lot more. But of course, we've so many specific narrow robots, if I can use the term, that do so many interesting things. So you've got robots that do autonomous agriculture, fertilization work. You've got companions for elderly people. You've got doctors' assistants. So again, these capabilities are being built by hundreds and hundreds of companies. There's a massive groundswell of capability in terms of robotic skills and experience. And I think the time is kind of coming right for all of these to come together by somebody who will pull together all these different strands and create something that will be as miraculous as ChatGPT was to us.
Oh, yeah. And then I look at the whole area around emotional intelligence. And, I think all of us have taken various personality tests over the years. What if the results of those personality tests are actually assigned to robots, where the robots themselves have particular personalities given to them? they have an ego, they have insecurities, they have, they want approbation, they want to be in the limelight, or they don't want to be in the limelight. You give these kind of personalities to various robots, and it's just, wow, that starts really getting interesting.
I love the fact that you picked some of those human failings as the personality traits rather than just the positive ones, because that really would make it interesting. And I think we will very soon get into a philosophical question about whether to put, if you were to design a human being, would you put flaws into that human being today?
Yeah.
Does it make us more human, or would we be better off as human beings if we had less flaws? Whole different discussion. But I think from a robot's perspective, what I find really fascinating is exactly that you are getting a chance to design an entity, a being. And so it's not an evolutionary thing that we're recipients of what has happened for over millions of years, but we're getting a chance to design this creature.
Yeah.
And therefore, what kind of features, what kind of capabilities would you put in? It strikes me that we've always said, we talked about human values and flaws, but I think there have been a couple of articles recently about where AI has proven to be more empathetic than human doctors in a couple of experiments, right? One was published by one of the US colleges on the West Coast. One was more recent in one of the medical journals. And I think if you think about it, none of us really wants to be non-empathetic in any sphere, let alone doctors. But the reality is, as human beings, you're pushed for time. If you're a doctor and you've got to see 13 patients in the next hour, you're going to come across as less empathetic simply because you want to get to the next patient and the next one, right? So it's that time constraint that you're always fighting against. And AI doesn't have that problem. If you want to talk to that AI for another 20 minutes, it can multitask across 10 patients.
Yeah.
And I think for those reasons, AI can come across as being much more empathetic. And then if you start layering in additional qualities, as you just said, if you made it really good at listening, if it has all the right prompts to kind of be a good listener, then you're really onto something there.
Oh, wow. The jobs is a big issue, and we all read the articles and read the media reports on, will AI take jobs, change jobs, add more jobs, increase inequality, or what's your take on it? What are you reading right now? Where do you land on this topic?
This could be a whole conversation. So I will try and summarize it. And these are just my views. So I'll say it like I see it. So I think firstly, any technology, AI is no exception there, affects jobs in two ways. One is it augments human effort, so it makes you more productive. And in that scenario, if there are 10 people doing a particular job in an organization, you no longer need 10, you need 7, because those 7 are now much more productive. Call center is a great example, right? So you have taken away some jobs, but you've done it by making the remaining people much more productive. So you've created a bit of inequality because you've made some people maybe richer because they can do more work and they're getting paid better.
Yeah.
The other side, the other way in which tech affects jobs is actually it eliminates an entire job or an entire task, right? Yeah. So a robotic factory, making cars where we no longer need people. It's not that one person is now making 200 cars. It's just that entire people's functions have been replaced by robots, right? And I think that's not a productivity conversation. It is a replacement of one form of input in economics terms with another form of input. You're replacing labor with capital. So I think both of these will happen with AI in this year. And you'll get lots of debates about whether it's augmentation or whether it's replacement. But some people in either scenario will lose their jobs. They will have to be retrained, redeployed. And if it happens at scale, we will see a societal problem that companies and governments will have to address jointly as to what to do if we have millions of people who are finding themselves out of a role because they happen to be at the wrong end of that particular, AI implementation or robotics implementation or whatever it is. Will there be more jobs or less is actually anybody's guess. I mean, history suggests that technology creates more jobs, of course, than it destroys. And this may well play out. But I think it's also good to reflect on the fact that the new jobs that are created can't always be done by the people who lost their old jobs.
Yes.
If you were in a previous technology transformation, if I take an example, if you were a factory worker in Detroit and you lost your job, you couldn't suddenly become the software developer in California writing the software for the autonomous vehicle or wherever it was. So there's a physical placement challenge, there's a skills challenge, and there's a time challenge. The new jobs don't appear as soon as the old jobs vanish. There might be a gap of a decade or so before the numbers catch up. So for all these reasons, there is short-term imbalance. I believe there's there's a book called The Technology Trap by a gentleman called Benedict Frey, who's an Oxford economist. It's a really good book that looks at this phenomenon in the context of the Industrial Revolution and how long it takes for new tech to go from improving productivity at the workplace to actually improving societal benefits. When does it make a group of people well off, richer as a society, rather than just improve the workplace? So I think those are the things that we'll have to track in this space. But I think at a larger level, the question, I guess, is that the benefits of automation are always concentrated towards the people who invest the capital for the automation. And it's not equally spread out. So that's, again, I think a more sociological, macroeconomic thing that we'll have to address in terms of if this happens at scale and all the automation is driven by a few owners of technology, then how does that wealth distribution take place? Then we are back in the conversation about universal basic incomes and things like that. So I think these are really interesting questions we will have to address. And I guess this is what governments are spending a lot of time trying to create the right governance, the right guardrails for AI adoption. I think this is a much bigger and more relevant problem than the hazy specter of AI-led, Armageddon. That's a very, very small possibility, but this is much more real, and this will happen over the next few years.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. So software development life cycles, a lot of these technological revolutions and enhancements have not impacted the tech sector. It just kind of continues to propel that tech sector forward. But for one of the first times, this AI has the opportunity of actually displacing a lot of these software engineers, or at least changing dramatically the work they have. But looking at the headlines from news over the last year, there's been a lot of technology companies that have been laying people off and making record profits at the same time. So this tells me that AI is having real impact on these companies that heavily invest in software development. What's your thoughts on that area?
I think that the first flush of tech companies laying people off, as we've seen in the last 24 months or so, is not even as yet. It's not AI replacing software engineers. I think it's companies refocusing efforts away from certain other forms of technology and redirecting that into AI. A good example being, you saw last year, Facebook went through a lot of trouble because of the Meta thing, and that didn't pan out. But I think they were smart enough to reorient themselves. They did shed some people.
Yeah,
it's not that they are not using AI to do software development as yet. I think they've simply refocused themselves on AI. And so there's just a skill mix rebalancing that I think is happening. And all the big majors have many, many technologies they've invested in over the past years. I think this set of changes that you're seeing is simply refocusing investment into specific areas of tech. I think the idea of AI actually helping to write code, it's not that it's going to take over the entire thing. I think it starts with tasks. So if you look at software development and you break it up, you get writing the test cases, writing the use cases, doing the actual coding, doing the testing. And I think what we're seeing is already there are signs that AI is quite good at doing actually each of these tasks quite well. The generative AI today, you can give it a URL and it'll look at the website and it'll write you the code for that website. Because ultimately software is nothing but a language. It's got syntax, it's got laws, it's got structures, and that's what AI is really good at. It is good at figuring out the patterns. Generative AI is really good at figuring out the patterns of a language and then assembling phrases, words to fit a new language, but with all the right syntax in place. I think it's quite intuitive that AI will be good at software development. I don't think we've seen that happen at scale as yet. So I think that's yet to really play out, but for sure, I think it'll happen. I think it will also change how software is developed. So we should expect to see that over the next 12 to 24 months as well.
So your current focus, Ved, is around innovation. And what role do you think generative AI is going to play now and in the future around innovation and generating innovative ideas and business plans?
I think it's got a really useful role to play. I think when you're inside the picture, it's hard to be objective about this. So bear with me. I think that in the first instance, it's like having a really smart person in the room with you when you
Yeah.
do anything in this in space. So to the point you just made, can it generate a bunch of really interesting new ideas? For sure, right? But the thing is that innovation isn't about just generating the ideas, right? You and I know this. So I've not met a single company of the hundreds that we work with that are actually short of ideas, right? That's not the problem. The problem is, how do you take the hundreds of ideas, maybe thousands that you get from your employees already, and actually build an engine that can take you from those hundreds and thousands of ideas into something that actually is a great outcome and something that scales. And that takes a lot of methodologies, tools, processes, skills, funding, structures, cultures, right? And so can Gen AI help us with all of these things? Maybe. And it's impossible to say not just generative AI, but AI in general, I think has the ability to absorb and model all of this very well. But I think we haven't yet seen the specific implementation of AI that can do some of this. I'm no doubt that somebody will come up with this in years, if not months. And so we will see that happen, surely. But I think it's not at the point of idea generation, because I don't think that's the problem at this point of time. It'll add to the ideas for sure, but when we say innovation, we are actually talking about the other end of it, of actually bringing those ideas through, and that's where I'm hoping for some real help.
As you were sharing that, I was thinking for a lot of operational folks, innovation is just a distraction. It gets in the way of what they need to do with their existing operations and existing KPIs, and it's a future-based unknown. So I could absolutely see the value to having a process which takes huge quantities of ideas, vets them, and then pulls them into the company, apply, and then monitors them, funds them, advances them should they deserve to be advanced. Wow.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point you make, because that's where we see this great access. In TCS, we often use Clay Christensen's models and the Clay map. And to maybe illustrate the example, and I'm just making this up as I go, if my job is to fit doors and screw them in as part of a building project, and that's all I do, I'm going to be really good at certain kinds of innovation, which is finding cleverer ways of screwing doors in, right?
Yeah.
Maybe I find a better technique, I find a better model of screws, maybe. But I'm not going to be the guy who thinks about an alternative to doors.
Yes.
I'm not going to be thinking at a level of saying, you know what, why do we do that at all? Here's a completely different way of doing it, right? Here's an autonomous door that recognizes you. That's hard for me. I don't have the skills, and I don't have the mindset or the time to invest in that kind of innovation. So I think the operational guys are really good at improving their own work through marginal innovation, whereas where you need the additional tooling and skills is actually when you go away from something truly disruptive, something that pushes you into new technologies, new risks, new users, or completely blue sky ideas. And that's a different ballgame altogether. So I don't think we should even think about innovation as one thing, but it has all these different flavors. And depending on the flavor, you may fund it differently, and you may skill it differently, and you may even measure it differently.
So at the beginning of our episode, you talked about your responsibilities and leadership at the London Paceport, and that it was a place in which people can focus on that kind of innovative thinking and those processes around organizational innovation. Tell us more about that. Just tell us more about the purpose and the value that somebody might get by spending some time there.
I'll probably give you 3 or 4 examples that will bring this out the best way. So we have a government department, one of the larger government departments in the UK, that came in to spend time to understand the future of one of their most significant initiatives, something that really engages people at the grassroots level. And we help them by challenging their current thinking and saying, this is your current model. And of course, we can do some clever stuff here, which is your marginal innovation, that we talked about. But what if you change your operating model completely and did something else? How would that look with the same demand that you've got, but you could change the way you work? But what if your demand itself changed? What if in the next 5 years something dramatically changes in the landscape, and the way citizens use your service completely is reshaped? How are you ready for that change? So this was really a more of a forward-thinking scenario building session to help them think about what the future might be. And this is what we call an explore workshop. Just helping people explore the future. We could do, what is the future of money? What is the future of retail? What's the future of healthcare, for example? And these are typically open-ended, divergent conversations, right? We have the opposite kind where, for example, one of our improved customer experiences in the boarding space, specifically when you're boarding a flight, can you use biometrics? For example, a self-managed biometrics so that they don't have to check your passport at the gate, right? And that's a very specific thing. It is a very convergent problem, which we will build some hypotheses, validate, and move to a proof of concept, right? So this is not a let's open the box and go as wide as possible. It's actually let's make it as narrow as possible so we can get to some outcomes and test and move on. So you get these two ends. One is an exploratory end, one is an execution end. And then you've got some clients who want to just improve their own ability to innovate, which means they want to do all of this, but they struggle because some pieces aren't working, right? Every company wants to innovate. I don't think there's a company that will put up their hands and say, no, actually, we're fine. But I would say 90% companies that we talk to aren't happy with what they've produced in terms of outcomes. And so there are some usual culprits, which is most companies find it hard to scale from POC onwards. So people are good at getting to proof of concepts, but proof of concepts don't scale easily, or some piece of this innovation doesn't work. And so a lot of work we do currently, actually, and I'm quite surprised by this, is clients that want us to help them improve their own innovation ability. And that's almost like saying, well, you need these 25 things to be really good at innovation. Let's understand which ones you're doing well, which ones you're not doing well, and then how can we help you build those muscles, right? Maybe it's a funding problem. Maybe your funding model is all wrong. Maybe your skills are not quite there. Maybe your process or tooling is not quite there, or maybe it's a combination of this. So when clients come to the Passport, the one thing we do want to do is kind of articulate the problem well enough, so that given that we're all going to be spending a lot of time and effort, including our clients, it should deliver the outcome that they want. And so we want clarity of outcome. We want clarity of problem statement. We want to put in the effort upfront to make sure that when they come in on the day, we take them on that journey that allows us to co-create the kind of outcomes they'd like. And then we can follow up from that day quickly enough so that it's not a nice day, lots of exciting ideas, and then nothing much happened to it. We need to be able to convert that. So it's constructive to think of this as a program rather than a specific day of discussing innovation. So the day is a part of a program. The program is designed to create some outcomes, and the outcomes are defined by us talking to our clients and really probing them. Because sometimes you may want something which can be delivered by a technology that exists. And then we should just get out of the way and say, you, Mr. Client or Ms. Client, need to talk to our colleagues who already do this, and all you need is for them to come and implement this. So it's also kind of qualifying out when we think the problem statement isn't an innovation problem, really, that it can be solved by an existing tool or technology.
Wow, what a fascinating area, just the whole subject around innovation and execution, as you put it, around innovation as well. Last question. Now, I know you've been intimately involved in various programs around elder care. Why don't you give us kind of a state of elder care and what you're seeing out there that's interesting and useful?
This is also one of those questions that we could have an entire hour on. Again, I'll try and summarize. Forgive me for rambling. I think it is abundantly clear that the world is aging. Even in the world's youngest populations, you're seeing the drop-off of birth rates and extended longevity. So there are still, in a country like India, which are historically known as being very young countries, still have a very sizable number of aging people. And populations are mobile, which means a lot of times people grow old, distanced from their children who have gone off somewhere else to work. So you've got an aging population that is also fending for itself, essentially. I think that is the story pretty much across the world. I think across the world, we lack the resources, the skills, the funding to necessarily look after all those people in the way that they need to be looked after. And it's not all kind of when I say look after, it's not like we're babying people. It's simply that, let's call it the right input at the right time for the right kind of support that is required, right? It might be companionship in some cases. It might be a health scenario in some cases. It might be just a keeping an eye out for an untoward incident in some cases, whatever it is. And I think technology can, it is to me and to some of my team members and colleagues, it's abundant that technology is the only option we have at this point of time to fill that gap that we currently have between available resources and the demand, right? If I look at the UK, if I look at Ireland, where we have some experience, there is a every year the government adds, I think, 40,000 hours of effort that are funded in Ireland for looking after elderly people. And yet every year, about 5 to 6,000 people are on a wait list for any kind of support. These are elderly people waiting to be, helped with fundamental things. So there is this massive gap, and that gap is growing. We know that governments are struggling because over the last few years, there's been such volatility that many simultaneous demands are being made of government funding. In Europe, for example, and the US obviously has a more private model, but even there, it's a challenge, right? And
Oh yeah.
it's well known that healthcare is challenging for people in the US. And then as you have a significant and large aging population, that will exacerbate. So we do need to find these answers. Technology is a big thing here, but it's also many things. It's Internet of Things and IoT sensing, so you can have smart homes that can actually be tailored towards the needs of elderly people. It's using the data to change how care is delivered, so you don't go. You can be driven by an intelligence about who actually needs a particular help at a point of time, rather than be driven by a rota. You can intelligently assign the human resources you've got where they're needed, rather than just going and knocking on people's doors or all of that. But I think we're just at the start point of this, and we are, you bring in robotics into that, you bring in AI into that, you bring in, all the technologies and tools we have, and the dramatic improvement we're seeing in sensing technologies and then edge processing. So things like fault sensing, which is such a big problem for a lot of people, things like managing conditions like dementia or Alzheimer's, all of which, is difficult. And typically for any one person, you have an ecosystem of professional and personal carers. You have family members, you have children, and all of these people need to be brought into a network of care for each individual, right? And that means data sharing. So you've got another layer of challenges because data is very badly managed in most care scenarios. A lot of times it's paper and pen, it's post-its on the walls, right? And it's not transferable. So if you move location, your care data typically won't move with you, and so you have to start all over again. So it's what you would call a massively problem-rich environment. We are very much at the foothills of it. We're seeing some early signs of, using devices, wearables, and installed technologies like IoT. But I think the transformation hasn't happened as yet. And we're really excited about the fact that there's this great opportunity to actually transform how care is delivered. Not to put sensors into someone's home, that's the tip of the iceberg, but using things like that to actually transform at a population scale how care is delivered, I think is an amazing opportunity. What we've discovered is that once you get past that vision statement, there are incredibly complex problems that you have to overcome, right? When we worked in Ireland, we encountered, of course, the pandemic. We encountered, cyber attacks on the healthcare system. We encountered, unfortunate as it may seem, even homicides, environments where we were looking to deploy the technology. We had to deal with resistance of care workers who felt it wasn't their job to receive the alerts that our system was generating. So you've got all these different kinds of complex problems, which are each is a non-trivial problem that you have to overcome. And sometimes you can think about and conceptualize problems at scale, but you still have to get to scale. And getting to scale will create new problems. It's very glib to say we can put sensors into people's homes, but you are essentially at population scale going to have to create an entirely new supply chain of sensors, and you'll have to maintain those sensors. So I think there's all to play for. I think this is going to be a problem that will run and run, because by all accounts, human beings are going to live longer, which means this problem will grow. All of us will need looking after in bigger and bigger chunks of time. So we could have this discussion in another 10 years. Hopefully we'd have solved a whole range of problems, but I'm sure we'd have discovered the next bunch of problems to solve. So I find this fascinating. I think it's worthwhile things we could do.
And Ved, you and I are not getting younger. We need to solve these problems before we are the recipients.
This is all self-interest. I'm telling you, this is all preparing the ground so that we can be the beneficiaries of this at the right time. No,
Yeah.
but I never ever speak to a person about this without hearing a personal story
Oh, yeah.
um, about how they've looked after a relative or an elderly parent, and the struggles they've gone through to kind of create care ecosystem that is required. Typically, we always use this phrase, right? It takes a village to bring up a child.
Yep.
I think it takes a village to look after an elderly person as well,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely. I'm in
So
that season of life. My mom's in her 80s. Brothers have moved to be nearby. We have IoT devices that she
there you go.
wears in the garden, the whole thing. So I certainly have a personal appreciation of this as well. Ved, I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your busy week to join us. Congratulations on the opening of the London Passport. I know there's going to be some really brilliant things come out of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. It's always a pleasure to speak. I love talking to you.